In professional baseball, if a player hits just 30% of the pitches thrown his way, he's going to be a multi-million-dollar superstar. But every pitch counts. Once that ball leaves the pitcher's hand, he has to make a decision. Not to make a decision is to make a decision. It's going to be scored. There'll be a ball, a foul tip, a strike, or a hit, but every pitch counts. And the same thing is true in marriage. Every day, your spouse is making a play for your attention, and every pitch counts. Now, unlike in baseball, if you only hit 30% of those pitches, according to studies, that marriage is going to be a disaster. A pitch in marriage is when a spouse makes a comment, when they ask a question, when they seek your attention. Not to make a play on that pitch is a decision, and it has consequences. Another way of looking at this is that it's all about honor. If we want to cherish our spouses, we have to notice our spouses, because that's the way that we honor them. And a spouse who feels dishonored will never feel cherished. And that is tested every day in every marriage, because just like in baseball, every pitch counts. I was seated in a church right behind a young couple. The pastor was a very engaging speaker, the kind that could just drop those insights right in front of you, and then he would have you laughing at a point, a lot to react to. And I noticed how when there was a reactive point, the husband would always look left, where he was seated right next to his buddy, and never right, where his wife sat. The first couple times I could see that his wife was getting increasingly frustrated because she'd want to share that moment of laughter with her husband or the moment of insight. But every time she looked left, her husband was looking left, sharing it with his buddy. The first few times she looked frustrated. About the third or fourth time, now she was looking angry. And then after a while, she was just looking ahead with this icy stare. I could just imagine the conversation they had on the way home. He wouldn't even know why she was so frustrated, but here's why she was so frustrated. She wanted to share that moment with her husband, and he was sharing it with someone else. She didn't feel noticed. She didn't feel like he was picking up her pitches, trying to get his attention. The ball was being thrown, and he didn't react, and it created a moment where she felt dishonored, where she didn't feel cherished. It's so key in marriage that we catch those moments, that we react to those pitches. Think of it this way. If the Queen of England enters the room, you're expected to either stand up, bow, curtsy, or do something. If a judge enters the courtroom, you're supposed to stand. If there's an incredible performance and everybody else jumps to their feet with this thunderous standing ovation, and you stay seated in your chair tapping out on your smartphone, you're making a statement whether you intend to or not. And so the same is true in marriage. Whether you notice or acknowledge your spouse, it makes a statement about whether you cherish them. University of Washington professor and marriage expert Dr. John Gottman has written, "Without honor, all the marriage skills one can learn won't work." Think about that. He's saying you can learn all these other skills, none of them will work if they're absent honor. The love languages, respect and adoration, knowing his needs or her needs, knowing how to resolve conflict, knowing that he's a waffle and she's spaghetti, or he's from Mars and she's from Venus. None of it works if honor isn't a part of that relationship. And honor is about catching those bids, reacting to those pitches. The Bible tells us to do this as well. Romans 12:10 says this, "Outdo one another in showing honor." It's like he almost sets up a holy contest that every day I'm trying to show my wife more honor than she shows me. I think earlier on in my marriage, I thought exactly the opposite. I would evaluate my marriage by whether I was honored, whether I was cherished, whether I was noticed. But really, Paul is saying, try every day to cherish your wife more than she cherishes you. And he would tell the wives, try every day to cherish your husband more than he cherishes you. So if you have a spouse that isn't catching your pitches, in one sense, it makes life easier for you, at least to be obedient to Scripture, because they're setting the bar a whole lot lower for you. Dr. John Gottman explores the whole concept of honor in marriage by describing two different kinds of marriages. He talks about marriage disasters and marriage masters. And it all goes back to how they handle each partner's bids, that pitch that is released. The bids are like this. Say the husband notices out the window, honey, do you see that beautiful bird? Or the wife comes home and says, honey, guess what happened to me today at work? Or one of the spouses says, you know what my parents told me the last time we talked on the phone? Now, if someone ignores the bid, they don't turn away from the TV, they keep looking at their phone, they don't put down what they're reading, that's missing the pitch. Couples who had a turn toward bid, that is, noticing the pitch and responding to it, if they had a turn toward bid of just 30%, that's what was called a marriage disaster. Most couples who got divorced, that was about their turn toward bid. Couples who were still together had turn toward bids, catch this, of 87%. About 9 out of 10 times, the other spouse caught the bid and responded to it. What this tells us is just like in baseball where every pitch counts, every marital conversation counts. It's either pulling you toward your spouse, it's pulling them closer to you, or it's pushing them away. And if we want to be marriage masters, we should shoot for 9 out of 10 of those bids. When I was working on the book CHERISH, ironically enough, I was in a hotel room. My wife had been sleeping. I'd been working for an hour or two. In fact, I was working on this very chapter, which shows how much it takes practice to get this down. And as my wife woke up, she started talking to me and she said, did you remember your dreams last night? And I said, no, I don't normally. She says, well, when you remember them, are they usually good or bad? I said, well, if I remember them, they're usually bad. And she goes, well, I read that's a vitamin B6 deficiency. And I couldn't help myself. I just started laughing. I know that's kind of cruel, but it just seemed absurd to me. I have a very organic, holistic, natural health kind of wife who's very suspicious of doctors, but very respectful of what she gets in her health food, natural life magazines. And it just seemed absurd to me that a certain amount of vitamin would impact your dreams. But here's the thing, I dishonored her with that laugh. I know nothing. I haven't studied this at all. I have a completely uninformed opinion. Lisa had at least read about it. And from the reaction on her face, I saw that I had missed that bid. See, if I wanted to catch that bid, I should have said, now how did they figure that? Or even better, maybe you could help me get more vitamin B6 in my diet. Since I completely missed that bid, I had to remind myself, Gary, you got to catch the next 9 out of 10. You've got to hit the next 9 pitches that come your way. Donnie, who's been married to his wife Jacqueline for just over a decade, does much better at this than I do. Here's the image that he spoke to me about that helps him in his marriage with his wife Jacqueline to catch her pitches. He said this, a teacher once told me that you listen with your eyes as much as your ears. If you want someone to feel like you care, you have to look at them. And so that's what Donnie does with Jacqueline. He says this, I make sure I start looking at her as soon as she starts talking. That helps me to focus. Even if I'm not particularly interested in what she's saying, I'm still interested in the person who is talking, so I'm looking at her. One late afternoon, Donnie was trying to wrap up a potential $200,000 bid in a project that he was working on. Now, he and his wife share an office, and she had been sort of done for the day, so she was looking through Facebook, and there was something that she found interesting about a sort of friend that Donnie had, not somebody that he knew very well, but Jacqueline was excited about it and wanted to share it. And I love what Donnie's response is. Here's what he said. I didn't care about that friend as much as I cared about the $200,000 project, but I care about Jacqueline more than I care about the $200,000 project, so I stopped what I was doing and I listened to Jacqueline. That's how we cherish our spouse. Husbands, cherishing your wife often isn't about what she's saying. It's about who is saying it. And wives, the same thing is true for you. If your husband speaks of a hobby or a sports team or something you don't really care that much about, try to remind yourself. It's not about what he's saying as much as it's about who is saying it. Does he feel honored? Does he feel cherished? Now, if we want to create a cherishing marriage, if we want to create a marriage that is marked by honor, to be the marriage masters, as Dr. Gottman refers to them, it's not just about the way we use our words. Sometimes it's the way we use other parts of our body. And I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the whole aspect of the bedroom here, because it's what husbands brought up to me so often. I would talk to wives and ask them how they wanted to be cherished, and they didn't need any prompting. I mean, I could sort of pour a cup of tea and it would be cold by the time they were done. Guys were a little more reluctant, would often say something like this: well, do you want the PG version or do you want the truth? And what they were telling me is about whether their wife acknowledges their desire for physical intimacy has a whole lot to say about whether they feel honored. And wives, I think it would help. And men, for those of you who have higher libido wives, this is the same thing for you. It's not so much about a physical desire often in marriage as it's about whether they feel honored in marriage. They want to be the spouse of whom it's said in the Song of Songs, he is altogether desirable. This is my beloved, and this is my friend. And now some of us might grimace saying, well, why can't I honor my spouse the way they want to be honored? But to have a spouse who feels cherished, they get to determine how they want to be honored. I've run over a dozen marathons in a lot of different weather conditions. In one marathon, it was late in the morning, past the halfway point of the marathon. It was very hot. And I loved it because there was this family with young kids that were holding out these cold, frozen, icy pops. And it was just the perfect treat in the second half of a marathon because it's cold, it's wet, it's sugar, which you want at that stage in the race. I literally was saying a prayer for that family. I was so grateful that they were giving these treats. It's the only marathon I've ever run where I've seen people handing that out. But you know what I've seen in every marathon I've run all throughout the course? I don't know why this is so popular, but I'll see these spectators that will take these sticks, like popsicle sticks, and they'll dip them into a jar of Vaseline and they'll hold it out for people who are chafing. Now, chafing has never been an issue for me. If you know how to prepare for it, if you get the right kind of clothing, it's not that big of a deal. But it's offered to me several times a race. Every time, 3 or 4 times in every marathon, somebody's trying to hand me Vaseline on a stick. And it doesn't really do me any good because I don't really have any use for it. I don't really desire it. So if we're to take this analogy that it's not just about words, sometimes it's about what happens in the bedroom. If what your spouse really wants is that frozen icy pop, and you're trying to hand them a stick that's dipped in Vaseline, they're not going to feel honored. They're not going to feel cherished, because what makes them feel cherished is what they need at that moment. Now you might say, well, why go to all this bother? Why does it matter so much that our spouse is cherished like this? Well, I think there's a biblical teaching on why we need to do it. I think it mirrors how God cherishes us, but it also releases the perfection of beauty within our spouse. I'll explain what I mean by that in just a moment. It helps our spouse overcome the hurts of their past and helps them become the person that God created them to be. There's a powerful story in Ezekiel chapter 16 where it talks about when God first met Jerusalem. Now, it's interesting, when you see most romantic comedies, one of the key plot points is that they always have to meet cute. You know, they bump into each other at a coffee shop and spill coffee on each other. They get into a fender bender. Maybe they have opposing small businesses or something, but it's a key plot point that they meet in a cute and memorable way. But in Ezekiel 16, God meets Jerusalem in as ugly a way as it's possible. Jerusalem is this anonymous city, not even a city, abandoned, pictured as a despised baby in the gunk and gore of birth, left to die, not even chosen by its parents. It would have died except for the fact that God came along, saw this baby, cleansed it, clothed it, and said, I say to you, live. And after God gave that baby life, the baby grew up to be a young woman. And that's the point when God chose to marry Jerusalem. We're told in Ezekiel 10 and following how God cherished Jerusalem, the once abandoned, neglected, and despised baby, with these words. God is speaking. I clothed you also with embroidered cloth and shod you with fine leather. I wrapped you in fine linen and I covered you with silk. I adorned you with ornaments and put bracelets on your wrists and a chain around your neck. And I put a ring on your nose, not the gross kind like a bull ring, but the cute little nose rings like they have in Portland, Oregon. And earrings in your ears and a beautiful crown on your head. Thus you were adorned with gold and silver, and your clothing was of fine linen and silk. and embroidered cloth. I mean, this was a baby left naked, abandoned, and God not only clothes this child now, he indulges her. He doesn't just barely provide for her with bargain basement clothing. No, she's wearing luxury clothes. She's dressed in Chanel and Gucci. She's walking in Jimmy Choo shoes. This wife doesn't shop at Walmart. She gets to go straight to Nordstrom's. But it's not just about what she wears. He indulges her in other ways with what she eats. We're told in verse 13 that you ate fine flour and honey and oil. Not the basic food stuff, but stuff that's tasty and nurturing. Like the wife who gets to shop at the organic aisle at Whole Foods, where everything costs twice as much. So this is what God does to Jerusalem. And notice what happens, what this cherishing, this attentive care, this honoring does to Israel. It lifts her from being a once despised, neglected, and dependent baby left to die to become a stunningly beautiful, powerful, even regal woman envied by all. Here's what God says of Jerusalem. You grew exceedingly beautiful, fit to be a queen. Your fame spread among the nations on account of your beauty, for it was perfect because of my splendor that I'd bestowed on you, says the Lord God. There was a time when nobody would even notice Jerusalem, and now she became the queen, envied by all. In fact, we're told in Lamentations 2:15 that Jerusalem is the perfection of beauty, the joy of the whole earth. And because we've read earlier in Ezekiel 16, we know how Jerusalem got there. What I'm trying to say is that Christian marriage, cherishing within a Christian marriage, is about releasing that perfection of beauty in our spouse. Now notice, God didn't cherish Jerusalem because she was beautiful. She became beautiful as God cherished her. And that's the way we should look at it in marriage, that when we cherish our spouse, we release that perfection of beauty in our spouse. Here's the biblical model. As God the Father cherished Jerusalem, as Christ the Son cherishes the church, so we're to cherish our spouse. God cherished the anonymous, ugly, rejected Jerusalem until she became a queen. Jesus cherishes the unfaithful, lukewarm church until she becomes the beautiful bride celebrated in the book of Revelation. And so we're to cherish our imperfect spouse so that they can have their beauty released and they can be the king or the queen that God created them to be. I've seen this happen when a marriage really learns how to cherish. Some friends of ours, Laura and Kurt, have been married for almost 4 decades now. Laura's heart was broken when she was just a little girl, a little kindergartner. She grew up in the South. She was in Texas, and she had this ritual every day where she would come home from kindergarten, take her nap, and then she'd get up from her nap, put on her fancy dress and her stiff white shoes, and she'd just wait on the sidewalk for her father to drive home from work. And he would stop about half a block away, give her a little kiss, put her in the car, and drive up to their apartment building. One day, Laura did everything that she had normally done. She went down for her nap. She got up. She picked out the dress. She put on the shoes. She's waiting there eagerly for her dad, and he never showed up. After a while, her mom finally came out and tried to coax her back in, and Laura pushed back, saying no. She told me she just didn't want her dad to drive by and not see her waiting there for him in her fancy dress. Finally, she had to go in. It had been too long, but she still couldn't quite believe that her dad would leave her like this, so she stayed right out by the window looking at the parking lot until it was time to go to bed. That window vigil, so to speak, lasted years. Laura only saw her father 2 other times in her life, and the last time was just a week before he died. She brought this brokenness into her marriage, and so it's not so surprising that when she married Kurt, she told him that this is what she wanted as a wife. She said, I don't care how much money you make. I don't care what kind of house we live in. I don't care how important your job is. The thing I want, the one thing that matters to me more than anything else, is I just want to be cherished. And not surprisingly, for Laura, being cherished means Kurt getting home at a good time. She told me this: my highlight every day is when I hear the garage door open and I know my man is coming home to me. So Kurt's had to make a decision to honor his wife, to cherish his wife, to catch those bids that she's sending him out every day, because for him, really, every day is a pitch. Is he going to get home at a certain time? And he knows more important than staying at the office to earn another $20,000 or $50,000 that year getting a bonus is to have that garage door opening and Laura being reminded, I'm married to a man that cherishes me. She'll always have that little hole in her of being left out, standing by the curb. But every day, it means even more to her when she has a husband who's never once left her in that situation, even after 40 years of marriage. And it's given her the strength to become who God created her to be. She is a large and in charge personality, a Texas woman with everything you think that might mean. She has a slight frame, but a giant personality, a beloved teacher at Second Baptist Church in Houston, Texas, a wonderful friend. And Kurt has learned to cherish her just for who she is, not trying to put her in a hole, but he knows that cherishing her means letting Laura be the woman that God created her to be. Here's what Laura told me. I'm such a strong person, but the fact that Kurt lets me be me makes me feel especially cherished. I'm the upfront person, the outgoing one. Some men might say, hey, why should she be up in front and center all the time? But Kurt cherishes me for who I am. He lets me soar in those settings rather than fighting against me. For a man to let his wife be the shining one, that's special. And it encourages me to be the highest version of myself. Kurt and Laura both know a lot of friends that made a lot more money than they did that have been divorced. And Laura would take their cherishing marriage over any of those homes or any of those cars that the other couples enjoyed. Because like Jerusalem, Laura was once abandoned by her earthly father. Also like Jerusalem, though, she was chosen. She was cherished. She's been indulged by a husband who wants to help her overcome the hurts of her past. And now she's become the highest version of herself, a queen in her realm, blessed by others and blessing others. So Kurt learned that cherishing Laura means letting her be on center stage in public because that's who God created her to be. He lets her be the focus of attention. She's his ballerina that we talked about in the previous session. He's happy to be the dancer who steps back into the shadows, letting his wife get all the attention. It means he freely gives her the time to study, to prepare her lessons, or to invite people over for dinner. It means feeding her soul with occasional indulgences. One season, he bought her season tickets to the ballet because he knew that she really enjoyed going to the ballet. That releases her spirit with joy and vibrancy, and it gives her things to talk about as she teaches. It means, most of all, agreeing to be home at a certain time so that when Laura hears that garage door open, that hurt from her past is erased, and she feels cherished by her current husband. Kurt's cherishing actions have told his wife, live, be who you are. I saw what others didn't yet see. Go and be that. And you know what? Laura has become that. So instead of being frustrated with your spouse, held back by personalities or character traits that seem stunted or maybe even embarrassing, what if you were to put cherishing into play? What if you wanted to say, I want to catch 90% of the pitches thrown my way. I'm going to be a superstar baseball player, and when a pitch is thrown my way, I'm going to notice it, I'm going to take action, I'm going to honor my wife, I'm going to cherish my husband, and I want to see what he can become being cherished that way, being honored that way. Release the perfection of beauty in your spouse by cherishing your spouse. When that pitch is thrown, you've got to react if you want a cherishing marriage.